Hello, RAP students. This is Dr. Smith here today, and I'm here to talk to you about the water cycle. So let's get ready to talk about the science of the water cycle. All right? So you're going to be subjected to my drawing today. Please remember, be advised, my drawing is not the best. Okay? So let us start by creating an environment that we can talk about the water cycle. So I'm going to do this. So let's say over here we have an ocean. This ocean is filled with water. What happens is that our sun heats up the water in the ocean, and when it heats up the water in the ocean, the water rises. As the sun heats the water and it rises, that's called evaporation. The water turns into water vapor, which is a gas, excuse me. And that gas, as it starts to condense, turn back into liquid because it cools. It cools, and so it goes through condensation. It becomes water droplets. When these water droplets get big enough, they fall as precipitation. Let me put the arrow here for you. They fall as precipitation. Precipitation can be rain, it can be snow, it can be hail. It's water in some form that has fallen from the clouds, and it comes to the earth. And once it comes to the earth, it rolls down. It actually flows down this way and becomes runoff. That flows back to the ground. It can go to the ground. It can go to creeks. It can go to streams. It can go to rivers and flow back to the ocean. Now, once it does that, it can now, if it goes to the ground, so let's say if it goes to the ground, another way that you can have evaporation, but it's not called evaporation necessarily. It's what it is that in the plants, let's see if I can make a flower here. In plants that are underground, they have roots. So they have a root that's down here. That runoff can actually go to the roots so that the roots get enough water. And then the water from the pores of the plant can actually go back up this way. That's another way for it to go into the atmosphere. So one other thing that we need to talk about is when you have evaporation, the water vapor is not the only option. That's one of the options, going up into the clouds. The other one is that the water can can form dew on plants, or the water can make fog, meaning that it doesn't go all the way up to where the clouds are, but is a little bit lower, but most of it goes up to the sky, okay? Now, the one thing that I didn't mention when we talked about the ground and the flowers that actually have the water into the roots and then it goes through the pores of the plant, this is called transpiration. So that's what you would call that. So I'll put it right down here. Okay. So I hope that was helpful for some of you that might need a review. This is all that I'm doing is just reviewing it. I'm not trying to be your teacher and to do an entire lesson on it. It's just to kind of jog your memory so that when we do the practice questions that you will be ready, okay? So now let's do some practice questions. All right, so let's look at some of these problems. The first one, if you want to read it before we start and try and answer it, you can go ahead and pause your screen now. And we'll do it together. When the sun warms water, which resulting process occurs? So just think about when you saw that body of water, the ocean, and the picture of the arrows going up, and as the water was being heated, what that was called. So let's look at our answers. Was it A, precipitation? Precipitation is when water falls in some form back to the earth. So that can't be it. Is it B, runoff? Remember that runoff is the water that once it's come back to the earth through precipitation, it runs onto the ground and goes downhill into other areas. So that's not what we're looking for because that's not the sun warming water. Evaporation. What is evaporation? That's when heat or the sun warms the water. And condensation is the opposite. It's when your vapor or whatever turns back into liquid. So we're going to mark D out and then we're going to go with C. Number 2. If you want to go ahead and read it, please pause your screen. And now we'll do it together. One morning, a student notices the grass in the area is wet. I'm just going to go ahead and underline wet. Although it had not rained, that's important. It didn't rain during the night. What could have caused the grass to be wet? So you need to find the answer that will let you know why the grass was wet. So let's look at the first one. A, during the night, water had evaporated from the trees in the area. So let's think about that. If water evaporates, that means it's warmed and rises from the trees. Would that make the grass or the ground wet? It probably wouldn't because more than likely at night it's going to be cooler. There's no sun out. So I would say no to that one. Let's look at B. The air above the ground became warmer during the night and caused precipitation. So what happens when the air above the ground becomes warmer? It evaporates. And it doesn't really cause precipitation. So I'm not so certain about that one. We'll just leave it. I won't mark it out yet. C, when the air cooled above ground during the night, which makes sense because the sun goes away and so the temperature is usually cooler, water vapor condensed on the grass. So the air got cooler. Usually when air is cooler, water vapor does what? When you're in the clouds and the water vapor condenses, it makes water droplets. Okay, that goes together here, right? So you could have water on the grass. That one sounds pretty good, okay? Let's go to D. The grass soaked up water from the ground during the night. The grass. Would the grass soak up water from the ground at night? So I would say I would go ahead and mark this one out, and I'd make a choice between C and D. My best bet would be, the best one would be C, just because it took you through the process. At night, it cools off at night, and that would explain how the water vapor turned into water droplets on the grass. So I would go with C here, okay, because it's the best answer. And I would mark out D. All right? All right, next. If you want to go ahead and read it, pause your screen. And let's do it together. How does the energy from the sun influence the water cycle? Let's look at what they have. By trapping water particles in the clouds. Does that mean that energy from the sun is influencing the water cycle? Not necessarily. By trapping water particles in the clouds. Let's keep going. B, by turning liquid water into water vapor. That does happen. And the sun does turn liquid water into water vapor, so we're going to keep that one. C, by causing water to precipitate. Does the sun cause water to precipitate? Come back down to the earth? It doesn't. I'm going to definitely mark that one out. D, by creating winds in the atmosphere. Does the sun have anything to do with the winds in the atmosphere? Not so. Okay, so now we got to figure out between these two which one. Let's go back and read A. By trapping water particles in the clouds. Does the sun trap water particles in the clouds? Not really. The better answer would be that the sun turns liquid water into water vapor. Okay? So let's go with that. And just go ahead and mark this one out. All right, let's go to question 4. If you want to read it on your own, go ahead and pause the screen. And we'll read together. How do plants return water back into the environment? Which one has the definition of returning water back to the environment? Is it A, evaporation? Evaporation is when liquid is formed into gas or water vapor, so that's not it. Is it condensation? Condensation is the opposite, which is water vapor turning into liquid, so it can't be that one. Is it C, runoff? That is when water is, it runs off to the ground and to the plants. And we'll hold on to that one. We'll hold on to C. Or is it D, transpiration? That's where plants have water that goes back into the environment. So I think that the best answer would be D, because D is specific to the plant, where the water goes from the roots out of the pores into the environment. C was a decent answer, but D is the best answer. Okay? All right, let's go to the next one. Number 5, water droplets forming on the outside of a cold glass of water on a hot summer day is an example of what part of the water cycle? So when droplets, which is water, is on the outside of a cold glass of water, but it's hot outside, how does that happen? Is it condensation, which is A, condensation? Is that where a water vapor turns back into a liquid? It could be. Why? Because the end product is a liquid, so that makes sense right now. Let's just hold on to it. Could it be B, evaporation? Evaporation is when the liquid turns into a vapor, and we don't have a vapor on the glass. The end product is not a gas. So let's go ahead and get rid of that one. We're wanting to know how the water is on the outside of the glass, okay? Precipitation, that is when liquid falls to the ground. That's not really one of the best answers here. So we're gonna go ahead and mark that out. That'd be great if we were talking about the environment as far as the weather. And D, transpiration. We don't have any plants that we're talking about, so that can't be the right answer. So that means we can go back to condensation. This is where the vapor turns into water, and that's how you could have the droplets forming on the glass, on the cold glass, because the temperature cooled the vapor and made it into water droplets. So let's go with that one, okay? Now, let's move on to number 6. After lake water flows through a dam, which processes are most responsible for helping return water to the lake or replace water in the lake? So just think about your water cycle and how water is replaced in the lake. Let's look at precipitation and runoff. Precipitation is what the droplets or some form of water that forms to the earth, and it runs off into different parts of the earth, into the bodies of water, into plants. So we might want to keep that one because you are replacing water. Transpiration is when you have water coming from the plants to the environment, and condensation is when you have water vapor that turns into liquid, but it hasn't yet hit the ground, so I would not go with that one at all. Let's go to condensation, which is vapor turning into liquid, and runoff. Those two really don't go together because you have to have the precipitation part, okay? And transpiration and precipitation. So transpiration is what comes from the plant to the environment, which is not what we're trying to get to. We're not replacing the water. Precipitation does help replace the water, but together they don't make sense. One falls to the earth, but this one here goes up into the environment, so we wouldn't do that one. So let's look at the one that we don't have marked. Precipitation, which is the water that falls to the ground, and the runoff, which goes to different areas on the earth, okay? So we'll go with that one. So just remember when you're doing ones like this that both answers, both definitions or both terms have to relate to each other and to what they're asking you, which is replacing water in lakes and come back to the earth. So I hope that wasn't too difficult for you. And if you had a little bit of a problem, you can review this lesson again, but you can also get help from your teacher at school and your RAP family. And like I always say, it's important to exercise your mind as well as your body. And I look forward to seeing you soon.